Hi guys, how's it going? This is Siri Nellutla, and today we're going to be talking about functions in Python. So what exactly is a function? A function is a group of statements or blocks of code that you might need to perform multiple times. And these can be very common tasks or common enough that it would be tedious to write them over and over again. So this is where functions would come in. So whatever code you need to execute multiple times, maybe it's like based on your requirement, right? You can write it within a function and call it every time you need to execute it, right? So that would make your code a lot cleaner, because it would be very messy if you had to write down like a lot of code over and over again, and it would also be a waste of time because you could be spending your time adding other functionality to whatever you're doing. So there are built-in functions that you must have seen, or if not, it's a nice time to learn. So these are the built-in functions in Python. This is what Python already has written for you. Okay, so ID, right? To check the memory location of whatever object, okay, you're looking for. So maybe this has like a lot of code, right? And if you needed to write that much code just to see where the memory location was, it would not be the best use of your time. And it would also take a lot of effort and time every time you need to like find the memory location of an object, right? So there's also the type function. These are all built-in functions, by the way. Input, eval, and etc., right? So not only can you use these built-in functions, but if you have other tasks that you would like to define, other tasks that you would like to perform, okay, you can define your own function. Okay, so these are called user-defined functions. Pretty straightforward. So these are the functions which are developed by the programmer explicitly according to their requirements. And the syntax that you use is the following. Okay, so you use the keyword def. Okay, that's used to define a function. Okay, and then you say the function name. Okay, and then parentheses afterwards. Okay. And then you can have a doc string. So in one of my other videos, I mentioned multi-line strings. So you can use, these are basically the same things as doc strings, except doc strings are used to describe the functionality of whatever code you're writing. So it's a doc string. And what it basically does is it just tells you, or tells whoever's reading your code, what exactly the function does, right? So if someone just looks at your code and they're just very lost, what is this doing, right? You're just gonna have to read this, they're just gonna have to read that, and they're gonna be like, oh, so this is what the function does, right? And then there's the body of the function, whatever code you need to execute, and then you return a value. Okay, you return a value. Okay, so there are two keywords that I used here. One is def, right? That's mandatory. That's used to define a function, right? You need it. But this return that you see here is optional. You don't need to return a value, but it would be useful. So this is optional, but this is mandatory, right? Okay, so let's do like the most basic example. Okay, we're going to define a function that greets you, okay? So we'll just call it, you can call it whatever you want, greeting, okay, then parentheses afterwards, and then we're going to just do a simple print statement, right? We're going to display something to the screen. We're going to say, hello, good morning, okay, or good afternoon, or whatever time of day it is, okay? And that's it. And then this is how you call a function. So when you just run this is not going to do anything. You just defined the code and what task it does here, but you didn't actually execute it, right? So whenever you need to execute it, you can just call the function. What's the function name? It's greeting, isn't it? So then you call it by putting the parentheses afterwards. And then you get, hello, good morning. So there you have it. You've written a function right here. So that's pretty cool. Now let's talk about parameters. So parameters are the inputs that you assign to a function. So you see the parentheses that I have around here? Those are where you would put the parameters. So whenever you call the function, you must provide the values for the input. So when you see here, greeting, if this function had a parameter, so let's just define greeting, and then let's say name. Okay, let's make it more personalized. So we're defining the function greeting again, except it has a parameter. It's an input that you're assigning to the function greeting. Okay, and you're gonna print an F string right here, and you're gonna say hello, and then we're gonna say your name. Okay, so whenever you call the function, right here, so I didn't call it yet, so that's why it didn't give me anything. So whenever you call it, see here, you're gonna get an error because it's missing one required positional argument name. So you always need to put that in there, because you see this input right here, I'm using an F string, right? So what it's based on the input that you pass in here. So so let's just say, well, my name is Siri, so why don't we put in there? So what do you get here? You get hello Siri. Okay. So why don't we change the title here to say parameters and arguments? Okay, so a lot of people mix up these two words, parameters and arguments. So parameters is this name right here. So it's when you define the function, but when you pass in, like say, okay, greeting, let's say John, greeting, let's say Elizabeth, say greeting, Lily. Okay, these are all arguments. These are not parameters. Okay, this is an argument, this is an argument, this is an argument, this is an argument, all to the function greeting. But when you're defining it here, right, this is a parameter. Okay, so whenever you call the function, you must provide the values for the function here. So now let's write a program that takes a name, how about it takes a number instead. Takes a number as an input and prints its square value. Okay, so we're going to define a function. Let's call it squared, because that's the purpose of the function, where it's going to take in the parameter of num. So whenever we call the function, we're going to pass in num as an argument, or like number, right? Okay, so the output is different every time you call the function, depending on whatever arguments you pass in. So you see here, maybe let's just do a little doc string here. You don't really need it, but if it was really complicated, it might be helpful to do that. So just squares the number you input, right? Or whatever. You can use your own words there. And we're gonna print the square of this number, whatever number you pass in, is number, or num, squared. So if you do 2 stars, and then that's a power operator, so you could have done num times num, or you could have done num to the power of 2. Why don't we just do that for now? Okay, so there I define my function, and I'm gonna call it, okay, because nothing happens. I just defined it, I didn't execute it. So now let's call the function squared. And what number do I want to square? How about let's square the number 5. Okay, the square of 5 is 25. Squared of 8. The square of 8 is 64, because 8 times 8 is 64, right? 8 squared is 64. Let's do another one. How about 11? The square of 11 is 121. How about let's do a big number. 789. Okay. Squared. The square of 789 is 622,521. Okay. So these are all arguments that I passed in here. 5, 8, 11, and 789. These are all arguments, but the number here, the num here, is a parameter. Okay. Cool. Now why don't we take a closer look at the return statement. Because so far we've only been using print, right? We've only been printing the value. Why don't we return a value? So the functions take an input values as parameters. We've talked about that. It executes the blocks of code that you write, and it returns the output with the return statement. Okay, so you can have as many parameters as you want. So why don't we define a function that sums up 2 numbers? Okay, you can have one parameter, you can have another parameter. Okay, num1 and num2. Okay, now we're going to return f, and then the sum of num1 and num2 is the actual value, num1 plus num2. So we return that, and then let's call it, okay, sum, okay, because that's the function name, sum, and then 4, 5. Okay, the sum of 4 and 5 is 9. Okay, if we print it, I got the same thing. If you don't write the return statement, then the default return value is none. This is an important point, okay? Because I know like the most appropriate question to come up at this point is, what is the difference between the return statement and the print statement? Okay, so if you do not write the return statement as I did here, the default return value is none. Okay, so let's define sum again here. Sum, okay, num1, num2. Let's print. Okay, let's copy paste that here. Okay, I'm just printing the same thing. Okay, and now when I print the sum of 4, 5, I get none. Okay, wait. Yeah, I get none, right? So I printed it here. Right? But when this is just displaying it to the screen because that's what I did when I called the function. But now when I'm printing the value, right, that's stored, okay, it's none. Okay, so now if I were to say return, let's return the string La La Land. Okay. You get La La Land. Okay. The moment you write return, and it just stops executing. It just executes the return statement, and it doesn't check anything that comes after. Okay. So that's also an important point to note. Why don't we write a function that finds a factorial of a given number? So instead of just saying, oh, print the sum like num1 plus num2, let's write a little bit more code. Okay, so let's define the function called factorial. Okay, it's going to take one parameter. It's also going to take one argument. We're going to define the variable result. We're going to set it equal to 1. And while num is greater than or equal to 1, we are gonna say result, and then the multiplication sign equals num. So this is basically the same thing as saying result equals result times num. So that's basically what a factorial is, isn't it, right? So if you have, okay, let's write it up here. So if you have 5 factorial, okay, this is going to be equal to 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. So it starts at 1, result starts at 1, but then you multiply it each time by the next number, right? And then you decrease number, or num, by 1, because you need to go on to the next number. You don't increment it, you decrease it, because when you start off with 5, then you go back to 4, right? Then you go down to 3, then go down to 2, right? So we decrease it by, we subtract 1 from number, and outside the while loop, let's return the result, okay? Let's call the function factorial, and let's say we want to find factorial. We want to find, find factorial. We said factorial here, so why don't we just say that below as well? So, oh, I see where I went wrong here. I didn't comment that out. I performed the same thing multiple times. Okay, so now it's better. Okay, so 5 factorial is going to be 120. 4 factorial is going to be 24. Okay, and when you print it, you should have no problem because you have the return statement. Okay, but on the other hand, if we had print, right, we had print the result, we would get none, but see, you see none and none, and we got 120 and 24 because we displayed it to the screen, right? And that's what we're printing out. So, but the default return value is none, if you don't have anything, if you don't have a return statement. Okay. I think we've gotten the basics, the bare bones of what a function is. I hope you learned something new today, and don't forget to stay curious.